Hey everyone, Chris Carter here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We've got Brian Batko today, and while Aaron Rodgers hasn't signed with the Steelers yet, he did visit with them. We want to talk about that, what that might mean moving forward. We'll also talk about this quarterback draft class, how it fits into what the Steelers are trying to do at quarterback, not just this year, but for the years coming forward, and what Naji Harris had to say now that he's with the Chargers, all here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive Podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Brian Batko. We're your Steelers writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, like Chip Taman Football that comes out every Tuesday with Brian Batko. Now, as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. They if you're hurt in an accident, you can call Edgar Snyder Associates. If you need workers' comp rights, you can call Edgar Snyder Associates because they are the place that's always going to have your back. And remember, call 1-800-94-EDGAR because there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Brian, we got to talk about the big news that literally happened. We were literally about to record, like in mid-recording this episode, and we had to switch things up because our guy Gerry Dulac, first out there, breaking news that Aaron Rodgers visiting with the Steelers today at the facility, talking to Omar Khan, Art Rooney, Mike Tomlin, the top brass here. What's your readout of how this has happened? Now, reports, according to Gerry, is that this does not mean a deal is imminent. What is your readout on how this, if this means anything in the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all initially jumped to, okay, is this thing about to get done today? Like, is this going to happen Friday, March 21st? Now, doesn't seem like it based on more reporting from Gerry and then some others on the national side. But it certainly means something, Chris, in my opinion. It means that this notion that the Steelers should just wash their hands of Rodgers, move on, tell him he's taking too long. Well, I guess that could still happen, but it hasn't happened yet, obviously. I mean, they're hosting him on the South Side today, or already did, I guess, by the time you hear this. And doesn't seem like it's going to be one of those hunker down for 12 hours and talk X's and O's and look for places to live, like it, or a multi-day meeting. It seems like it's kind of an in and out. Okay, we touched base, we got the face-to-face. Let's see where this leads. So to me, it maybe it doesn't mean a ton in the grand scheme of things, and maybe we're still waiting for a while. But yeah, it means that they're still in on this thing. He's still in on them to some extent. What I kind of bristle at a little, and you tell me if you agree, this makes it seem very obvious that he was waiting on the Vikings to potentially make an overture to him. And that very much was his preferred spot. Because what was it, Wednesday morning that Tom Pelissero reported they were moving forward with McCarthy and J.J. McCarthy and not pursuing Aaron Rodgers, quote, at this time.
But that's the other thing. They said at this time, and then there were like several other reports that said they're not considering Aaron Rodgers. And I'm just like, I feel Cam Hayward, man. He's just like, I am over it. Like, we just need someone say something, do something, make a decision. Because this limbo is just there's no foundation. There's nothing to base anything off of. And I think your take that is one of the, I think, the more logical conclusions we can have of this. But then the thing is that the Vikings, what if they turn around and say, you know what, we change our mind, or we didn't actually not decide it. We just said that we just wanted to keep JJ McCarthy because we think he's the long-term guy. There's so many questions I have here, Brian.
And I know people get sick and tired of the speculation. I don't blame them. I'm kind of right there with you to some extent. But failing Aaron Rodgers keeping me in the loop every day, which is not happening, that's all we can kind of do, because for all we know, the Vikings are telling him, hey, here's basically our pitch to wait around and see. Maybe let us get eyes on McCarthy and OTAs or, mini camp or whatever, and perhaps we come back to the table with you. Do you want to do that? It's up to you. Like, we're not forcing you. Obviously we can't, but also no one's forcing you to sign elsewhere with the Giants or the Steelers. So I'm with you here. I'm with Cam. If I don't want to put words in his mouth, but like, in my opinion, if this were Aaron Rodgers of 6 years ago, or even Aaron Rodgers of 2 or 3 years ago, before the 2-season Jets tenure that went south due to injury and then, a whole bunch of messes last season, then I would say, yeah, wait around till July if you have to, and let Mason Rudolph handle house business in the interim. But I just don't think it's worth it for Rodgers in his current state. I don't. I think he's a tier above Russell Wilson, and he might be multiple tiers above Mason Rudolph, but he's not the guy that he used to be.
He's not. And again, here's the other thing about this Brian. I joked about this with our buddy Nick Farabaugh, who also covers the Steelers. He was like, I just hope they sign him and so that this can finally be over. But I'm like, Nick, it's never going to be over, because here's the thing. Say he signs with the Steelers. We'll be done with that iteration of it. But will he show up for OTAs? Will he show up for minicamp? Those are things the Jets dealt with last season when he was supposed to be the guy that was going to be leading them to the promised land, that they finally had the quarterback that was going to help piece everything together. And then he didn't do that. And so I think if the Steelers have to look at this, and unless there is an agreement, like at this meeting, they're like Mike Tomlin, Art Rooney, Omar Khan are like, hey, Aaron, we respect your process right now, whatever you're doing, but when you get here, you need to be all in, or you're not here at all. If we're signing you, you're coming to everything. We're understanding. There's no questioning. I'm not talking to the media every day of mandatory minicamp about why you're not here. That needs to be set in stone, because if that doesn't happen, or if that does happen where he is not showing up, and then that becomes the talk of all of spring, and then that becomes the talk leading into summer is, what's the connection like between Aaron Rodgers, because he hasn't been around. That is going to get in the way of so much. It's going to be such a distraction, and this is a team that does not need those distractions right now with all the developmental things that they need to be focusing on.
Yeah, I agree. And then is he going to be on the Pat McAfee show every week with the latest conspiracy theory or whatever? Or, and that's kind of like a joking thing that doesn't really affect the football field, but the stuff that would is he going to be making, any comments that put teammates in a bad light? Maybe he learned his lesson to some extent with Mike Williams last year, who of course then became a Steeler and is now back with the Chargers. It seemed like those guys honestly kind of patched it up for the most part. And I'll give Mike Williams credit. I watched his, we're going to talk about Najee's Chargers presser in the third segment here, but I watched Mike Williams's as well. And someone asked him what he learned from last season, or what last season was like. And he brought up unprompted the chance to learn from a guy and work with a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers. So if there were any hard feelings, he certainly put those to the side. So I do think guys benefit from playing with him, and it is one of those pinch yourself, dream come true moments for a lot of players. But let's be honest, Chris, there's a lot of guys in the Steelers locker room who had kind of that same warm and fuzzy feeling this time a year ago with Russell Wilson, and they lived firsthand how that can not really mean much once you get to a lessened, diminished state of your previous powers.
Yeah, and if you lose 4 games straight, like losing does not help any warm and fuzzy feelings, and you can wear out your welcome, as it appears Russell Wilson may have, is because he's not with the Steelers right now. I think if Russell Wilson was appreciated and across the board on the Steelers roster, I think they would have offered him a contract as soon as Justin Fields left, and then they were like, this wouldn't be a problem right now. But that's my thing, Brian, is that if you're signing up for Aaron Rodgers, you're like Russell Wilson supposedly did not wanted to have audibles and wouldn't stick to Arthur Smith's system and wanted to switch things around and had to be kind of told you can't do that. If imagine Arthur Smith saying that to Aaron Rodgers, like how is that he's gonna look at Arthur, like he's gonna look at Arthur Smith on the sideline. There's gonna be like some like just straight up there's moments like in The Office where like when they stare into the camera and they're just like, you see what this guy's really telling me right now? Like that's what's gonna happen. And and here's the thing, that this is who Aaron Rodgers is. He marches to his own drum. He does this. And look, if he comes in and he brings the talent that you saw 2 years ago with the Packers, great, awesome, but the last 2 years of the Jets do not suggest that. And it does suggest the circus that he brings and the unruliness that he brings. And if he brings those things in and shakes up your locker room, you are the organization and the coaches and the front office that signed up to bring that in. There needs to be some understanding that he cannot do what happened in New York in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and I suppose maybe that's part of what today's meeting was about. Maybe it was, hey, what's your commitment level for all the phases of the offseason activities, or our receiver room's pretty set. We don't have a spot for Allen Lazard or Randall Cobb, or those guys right now. Or what is your philosophy in terms of the pre-snap checks and everything you can and can't get to, and how that compares to Arthur Smith. One thing that I will say though, Chris, I just get the sense that Arthur Smith would trust Aaron Rodgers a little bit more than he did Russell Wilson. It just felt like there was not a ton of trust there from him, even to a guy who, future Hall of Famer, Super Bowl winner Russ, but I don't know that he was ever viewed as like the true cerebral, I'm going to change that, because that was always what it was at Seattle. It was let Russ cook, don't overload him with the stuff of, okay, you need to get from this progression to that progression. Like, don't neuter his ability to be an ad-lib artist and, extend plays and then use his big arm to get the ball downfield. So I think there was like whispers of that kind of with him at the end of his time in Seattle. I know there was a wristband kind of controversy at one point. He didn't want it. They wanted him to wear the QB wrist. And then, of course, goes without saying, he and Sean Payton clashed in many ways. And we know Payton is a guy who likes to have very convoluted, complicated, long play calls for his quarterback, and isn't really known for, hey, let's just let him get outside the pocket and work his magic. Now, Payton achieved all his success with Drew Brees being in the pocket and, being surgical with it. So I do think that Arthur Smith might have a little bit more, confidence in Rodgers operating that way, but you never know until you're in those situations.
Yeah, you never know. And I think we never know when Aaron Rodgers is actually going to decide what's going to happen here. I imagine now, Brian, what this is now kicking off is he's doing this with the Steelers. He's probably going to do this with the Giants in short order. And I wouldn't be shocked if there was a meeting with the Vikings, if he was just like, hey, let's just sit down and talk, unless you guys really are completely out on me. And I think that will tell us, how serious that Pelissero report was, during the week. But bottom line is,
I just don't think it's worth holding up your off season for him at this point. But
I'm right with you. I am right with you. This is, I tell you what, he's holding up my offseason, Brian. I don't care about Omar Khan and which free agents.
I'm second screening Robert Morris, Alabama here as we speak. The Bobs are down 6 with 40 seconds to go before half. Rodgers threw a crimp in my plan to go watch this game somewhere.
Yeah, man, this just getting in the way of everything. I'm supposed to be enjoying a nice March. My birthday's in a few days. Like, so many things. But hey, we work hard. We stay on top of things here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and we will continue to do so here on the North Shore Drive podcast. When we come back, we're going to talk about quarterbacks in this draft class the Steelers could and should be looking at, and where they should be getting one. We'll do that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, I remind you, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates, who also do workers' compensation. When you've been hurt on the job, who decides when you're better? Who decides when your treatment is over? Who decides when your benefits are over? The answer might surprise you. Insurance company doctors do. And how does that make you feel? If the answer is not great, that's why you got to call Edgar Snyder Associates today, because at 1-800-94-EDGAR, they'll fight for the workers' comp rights that you deserve. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. This episode is also brought to you by UFC Gym Pittsburgh. Are you ready to train like a champion? UFC Gym has everything for total body health under one roof. They have group classes from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to Zumba, personal training, cardio, weights, cryotherapy, infrared saunas, and more. All for an unbeatable price. Not sure where to begin? All members get a starter session with an expert coach to help map out your fitness plan. Your first visit is on us. Drop in with free parking at Market Square or the waterfront, and follow UFC Gym Pittsburgh on social media. Train different, feel unstoppable at UFC Gym. We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. Brian, let's talk about quarterbacks the Steelers could be adding. Also, Bobby Moe gets it down to 3 just before half. Let's go.
Yeah, that was a big triple.
That's a big one indeed. But let's talk about the quarterback draft class as it is. Now, I will have a story and a feature coming out on Sunday that's kind of giving you guys my insights on where I see these guys, not just where they're projected to go, but where I see them actually being a proper fit for the Steelers. But Brian, there's been a lot of push for the Steelers to go after a quarterback in the first round. And I'm not talking about trading up to get Cam Ward first overall or anything like that, but there's more and more draft experts are starting to slot Jaxson Dart out of Ole Miss to be the Steelers option at 21st overall. What's your take on if the Steelers should take a swing at quarterback in the first round this year at all?
I think the 2022 Kenny Pickett draft and eventual pick by the Steelers kind of told me, don't do that unless you feel like this guy's got the potential superpower to put you up there with the Bills, Chiefs, Bengals, Chargers, Ravens. I mean, Kenny Pickett was a nice player, still can be. I think maybe like a replacement level starter at times, but I worry about Jaxson Dart being in a similar boat. I mean, Chris Sims came out with his quarterback rankings the other day, and I think he's always has some interesting opinions. He doesn't think Dart really has the necessary arm strength to be one of those top 10 to 15 quarterbacks at any point in the NFL. And that's what I think the Steelers should be, looking at if they're going to use a first round pick on a guy. So, hey, if Dart were there in the second and they still had theirs, you could talk me into it. Third, certainly, but it seems like he's getting pushed up the board. And I just don't know if it makes a lot of sense for them where they are.
I don't think it does either. I'm right with you. And I'm glad you bring up Kenny Pickett because that's the comparison that I make. Kenny Pickett was in a draft class that everyone said was not a very good draft class for quarterbacks, which is what a lot of people have said about this class. Granted, there was not a Cam Ward in that class. Cam Ward, I think, everyone's going to say, hey, he's a first-round quarterback. You can draft him there. I don't even think there's a Shedeur Sanders. I honestly think Shedeur Sanders might be the player I compare more to Kenny Pickett because he doesn't have great arm strength. He loves to hold on to the ball. He loves to do that spin out of the pocket to buy more time and then puts the ball with some decent accuracy at the college level and doesn't have great athleticism but has decent athleticism. Like, I think that's the fit there. Jaxson Dart has like some unique abilities and some interesting skill sets, but I'm right with you. Like, that's not first round talent right there. First round, like if you do that, you are repeating what you did with Kenny Pickett, in my opinion. Now, I could be wrong because quarterback is one of the craziest positions to try to predict. It's why so many teams take so many swings at it before they eventually get it right and find their real franchise guy. But I look at that, and if the Steelers, this is why I think the big take here that Brian is, the Steelers, I feel like, are setting up to actually take a real swing at their franchise quarterback in next year's draft class. And you can never tell who's definitely going to be there, but there's already the sense of guys like Lenore Sellers out of South Carolina, Arch Manning out of Texas, Nico Imilov out of Tennessee, Drew Aller out of Penn State, Russ Musmeyer out of LSU, Klubnik out of Clemson. Like that, there's a lot of guys that if they perform well, there's a lot of guys that have a chance to perform very well and make a very good quarterback class in next year's draft class. And that's the group I think the Steelers are waiting for. And if they're waiting for that, drafting one in the first round this year would defeat the purpose of going after that group next year. You could draft one on day 3 of this draft class and then go get your guy next year, because then you have 2 young quarterbacks, one that you drafted later, one that you drafted earlier, and it gives you some flexibility in the coming years.
Yeah, I think that's the sweet spot for me. You could, I probably wouldn't crush them if they used a 3rd round pick on one, just because I would look at it as, okay, especially if they don't sign Aaron Rodgers, because I think if Mason Rudolph's your starter, like you better have a reasonable backup plan for that. I mean, if he's just faltering 6, 7, 8 games into the year, I would say, yeah, let's give ourselves another crack at this thing by turning it over to a rookie. And maybe, by the end of the season that he's got something to him, or maybe, this isn't the guy either. We are going to have to go back to QB in the first round next year. So to me, it was almost like a sliding scale of like, you bring back Justin Fields, and I'm drafting that QB a lot lower. You don't bring back Fields, and you bring in a Rodgers or a Rudolph. Now I'm potentially drafting that quarterback higher this year, just to kind of, Howie Roseman said way back, and he kind of got memed for it, but like, want the Eagles to be a quarterback factory, meaning like, hey, we're going to keep taking one every year because you just never know. I mean, you might get the Jalen Hurts, you might get the Carson Wentz, but either way, that guy either becomes very valuable to you or he becomes a very valuable asset to another quarterback needy team. So, I mean, you hear these schools of thought of draft a quarterback every year until you hit on one. I think that's almost a little too reductive because, you need to see these guys play, and then that's going to, alter your perception of them once you see them. And, we know the Kenny Pickett debates that raged and still would rage about whether he, needed more development or could have been better with more time. So, I mean, I just think, the sweet spot for me would be early day 3 with one of these Jalen Milroe, Quinn Ewers, Will Howard, Tyler Chuck, Riley Leonard, even potentially.
Riley Leonard is one I'm not in on, but I'm right with you as far as the value. You get an early day 3 quarterback. I really like Will Howard. I think he makes a lot of sense for what they're trying to do. And then it brings you a Mason Rudolph level prospect because Mason Rudolph, again, he's now known as a career backup. But when he came into the league, there were some who thought he should have gone in the first round. Heck, I think Kevin Colbert said that they had a first round grade on him, even though they drafted him in the 3rd round. But there were some that thought, even when he was at the tail end of his years in Pittsburgh, there's some that felt like maybe they should give him a chance to be the starter. There's some people that are saying that now. So, if you get a guy like that where his ceiling could be high enough to be a starter who could work in your system, and his floor could just be, hey, he's your career backup, that's fine in the middle rounds. You still need backup quarterbacks. And again, Mason Rudolph's now coming back to them as their potential backup quarterback right now. So I think
quick,
that is.
I'll say this exercise. Sure. So I did my big board for the Steelers fits quarterbacks a month ago now, and I had to send in the projected rounds. Here's where I went: Dart 1 to 2, because I think that's reasonably where you're going to get him. Obviously, you'd take him in the 3rd if you were there. I had 5 guys in the 3rd to 4th round range, probably, of where they'll get picked: Will Howard, Jalen Milroe, Quinn Ewers, Tyler Shuck, and Kyle McCord, who I actually think would not be a good fit for the Steelers. But he's Rudolph-like in terms of being a pocket passer. And then I had Leonard in 5 to 6 as my projected rounds for him.
I think those are all very fair, and that's the range that you're looking at there. I think it just makes sense for them to go there. And also, again, you traded away your 2nd round pick for DK Metcalf. You need to still be adding pieces to this. The whole point of them even go if the strategy is for the Steelers to save up for next year to be they trade up to go high in the draft and get their franchise quarterback, and you want them to start sooner rather than later. The whole point of doing that, though, is to have a roster ready to inherit them, to inherit, to say, hey, you know what? Like Ben Roethlisberger, he got on a moving train in 2004 when he joined the Steelers. They had an O-line, they had a run game, they had playmakers on offense, they had a defense, and so Ben Roethlisberger just had to be a decent quarterback. And decent quarterback play was exciting because the Steelers fans had been used to Tommy Maddox at that point. And that's what could happen if they get the guy next year, is if they get everything right leading into next year, where the D line's a bit sharper, the defense is still a top 10, maybe a top 5 unit. The offensive line has shown progress because of the investments they've made there. Now they have DK Metcalf. Maybe they have another receiver next to him if George Pickens gets franchised. Who knows? Pat Freiermuth's still around. But having those pieces in place ready for when you go get that guy, that should be the Steelers' primary goal. And so if you're drafting a quarterback early this year, you're hurting that goal. But if you get them in the 4th or 5th round this year, I think you give yourself that chance to have that young backup quarterback that you just develop and put your fingerprints on in case the other guy doesn't work out, or while also giving you the chance to go and address all those other positions with those earlier picks.
Yeah. And, I think there's also something to be said, and this is a conversation we might be having a lot next year, but I don't think it's the worst thing to give a quarterback a year to learn and watch and not get thrown into the fire. I still think that's a very viable strategy and alternative, especially considering whether you draft someone who's got more experience or someone who'd be coming out after year 3.
Absolutely. We're going to take one more break. When we come back, I want to talk about what Naji Harris had to say. He's been doing his media rounds now that he's joined the Chargers, and he's been talking about his time with the Steelers. We'll do that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. They're your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you get your new Honda vehicle at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, or visit their website at moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
We gave the all-electric Prologue EX class-leading passenger space. And we made its tech intuitive with Google built-in. Perhaps that's why we were named Best Overall EV and Hybrid Brand by Kelley Blue Book. It's nice when a dream comes together. Buy online, reserve from select dealers, or visit your local Honda dealer today.
We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. Brian, let's talk about what Najee Harris had to say, because he's had to say a lot since his
Chris,
time.
can I note one thing left over from the previous segment?
Oh, I apologize. Go ahead.
No, you're good. This is something that I feel like has kind of become like it gets like perpetuated from year to year, and it ends up being like urban myth or urban legend, I guess, about the Steelers. Kevin Colbert said about Mason Rudolph. He was asked, "Did you have a grade on Mason Rudolph?" He said, "I'll say this." I have the transcript right here. He said, "I'll say this. He was with the group of the top quarterbacks. That was a really good position." So he didn't necessarily use the whole first round thing, but you just 7 years later now, the narrative, you'd think that he literally stood up there and said, "Yeah, we had Mason graded as a 92 overall first round grade for us with the Steelers."
I'm so glad you said that, because now I'm disappointed in myself, because I bought the hype in that. Yeah. Because, but if that's one, what? Before we get into this, I want to talk about that, because that is something that happens. The echo chamber that happens on social media, because so many people said that that's what he said, and I remember, I now remember, like that clocks back in, is like he didn't say that, but then after so long, even I believe that's what he said. Jeez.
Yeah, it's a paraphrase, and like you're splitting hairs. He did say he had him rated among a really, with the top group. So you kind of do the logic and like ipso facto, yes, then he had a first round grade, because we can kind of see this that who was it that year? Baker, Lamar, Josh Allen, all those guys. So yeah, just some food for thought.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up, and that is very good on you, because even I had forgot that he did not use that term. That was something that was paraphrased, misquoted, and misused, and then applied for several years, and now we're here. I forgot about.
And I think he later said in another Q&A, like Mason had first round grades on him, but
okay, so there's that. All right,
you got me, Chris.
Yeah, I got you. You got me.
Yeah.
All right. So let's keep it going here about Najee Harris. He came out and he said a few things when it came to the Steelers. He talked about how the Chargers facilities are so much better. He said it's not like this in other places in the NFL, and people are like, well, you've only been one other place in the NFL, so clearly that was talking about the Steelers. But then he also talked about the offense, and I think that's where I think things got a little bit more like directed towards how his time at the Steelers went. He said, quote, "I think the veteran guy on that team was like a 2-3 year vet. He's still learning himself. I'm coming in. I'm just trying to look for people to pick their brain, but it was just the defensive guys. I'd go to defensive guys and talk to them, but there wouldn't be too much about the offensive thing through my years. I learned a lot, but I only learned firsthand." He says, he said, quote, "We just didn't know anything on offense, really. We didn't have any identity. We had a young guy come in at quarterback. I really didn't have anybody to learn from on the offensive side. My time in Pittsburgh was a lot of things, a lot of learning experiences, playing for Mike T, playing in that division. There were a lot of ways I didn't even realize what the NFL was really about until I came to Pittsburgh." And he says, "I don't want to go into detail about it, even though there's a lot of details that he's throwing in there. But I feel like there was a lot of stuff in my game where I could have elevated more and I could have did more. And I feel like I just didn't get it done. I feel like I was obviously missing something. It was interesting years there. I'll just say that. Interesting years." A lot of words there from Najee Harris. And, I don't think he is dumping hard on the Steelers there, but that's one of those situations where I think that it would behoove a player maybe to just be like, hey, you know what? Let's just talk about the future here and talk about the Chargers, because now people take those words and now people are like, oh, but Najee Harris, he hates the Steelers. That's what that situation is. And he does point when he says they didn't have an offensive identity. He's not wrong. They didn't, but certainly that's throwing a little bit of a barb towards the team that, drafted you in the first round and let you go into free agency.
Didn't sound like he really loved it here, to be honest.
No,
I mean,
he did not.
He didn't even do the the typical like, oh yeah, I really appreciate them drafting me in the first round. They made me an NFL player. I'll always be thankful for that. And like he may well feel that way, but it's certainly not what was the first thing that came to his mind when he was asked to reflect on his time in Pittsburgh. Now, granted, it's still fresh. It's a couple months ago. The season and his career here ended. So, and he also, I mean, basically put it out there that he was pretty much midway through the season. He's like, yeah, I'm not going to be back here. So, I don't really find much fault in what he said, and it's Najee. So he's always kind of a moving target. One week, it seems like he's blasting the coaches and the O-line. The next week, he's telling the media, stop dumping on the coaches in the O-line. So you can never really pin him down. He's a very mercurial guy. But yeah, I mean, I think it probably speaks to the Steelers didn't have quite the infrastructure and roster to maximize his talents as they thought they did when they picked him. And when he says stuff like he could have elevated more, I think that was partly taking accountability himself. Like, I could have been better, but also, yeah, I mean, the linemen in front of me weren't always clearing the holes, and the play calling didn't always make sense. He clearly was a little miffed that he wasn't utilized more as a pass catcher. I think he certainly fancies himself as more of an all-around back than the between the tackles guy that we saw by the end, other than the tosses, of course. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of sad, honestly, that it ends this way, that he clearly wanted out, and that the Steelers, didn't do more to take advantage of him as a first round pick. Because you can argue, hey, any pick that doesn't get their 5th-year option picked up, I'm not saying he is, but you can make the case that guy's a bust.
No, yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. And I've been one that I was on the Naji Harris train when they got him, and I thought that, hey, give him an offensive line, that guy's gonna cook. Problem is they never got that offensive line together, and they never developed a passing game, and so you kind of just, it became a waste. And look, Najee Harris deserves credit. 4,000-yard seasons each. I think the only people that have done that in the last 20 years are like Adrian Peterson, LaDainian Tomlinson, and like one other player. So like, he's in a really good company there. Now, granted, people say, well, 1,000 yards isn't the same thing in today's NFL. Yeah, I agree. But no other player had done it. And I think part of that is his reliability and what he's able to, what he did bring to the table. I thought, I've looked at the comparison of his efficiency and run numbers over the years. He has a lot of similarities to Marshawn Lynch, like where like Marshawn Lynch's early years, he did not look like beast mode. You know, he
right.
did not look like the same Marshawn Lynch, but when he got an offensive line and he got a passing game and he didn't have to carry things by himself, and he wasn't getting hit at the line of scrimmage every single time, he became a dynamic threat. Now, I'm not saying Najee Harris is going to turn around and become Marshawn Lynch out in Los Angeles, but I do see that being there. But I think the other thing,
an interesting parallel, though, because whenever we think of Marshawn Lynch, we don't really think about him toting the ball in a Bills jersey. We think of beast mode Marshawn in Seattle, his second stop.
Exactly.
So
exactly,
that's Najee's mentor. Maybe he will follow a similar trajectory.
Maybe, but even outside of Najee, I think there's a lot of people that want to point this towards, like, you know, that shot being at the coaching staff, that shot being at the front office, that shot being at ownership from the facilities talk, from the offensive identity talk, and everything else there. And I think it's another sign why the Steelers. I think it's another point towards the Steelers, like, hey, you haven't fixed leadership on offense. I mean, Brian, you and I were there in 2021 when the Steelers drafted Najee Harris. Ben Roethlisberger would sit with him and talk with him after practice all the time, and would try to pass on wisdom. And so many times it'd be like, I wonder what Ben is actually saying to him right now, because I don't know how these guys are connecting right now. But but like, I think that's where the Steelers, they haven't figured this out, and that's why they keep there's such turnover on offense, because they haven't found those leaders for the futures, whether they wanted it to be Najee Harris or Kenny Pickett or whoever. Russell Wilson last year, it hasn't been that. And maybe Pat Freiermuth could be one of those guys, because they've signed him to a deal. Maybe they can find that on the O-line with some of these younger guys they picked in the higher rounds. But that's something that needs to happen soon. Otherwise, there won't be a nucleus on offense. And then when that defense ages out, you won't have the other side of the ball to balance things out.
I'll make this final point kind of in defense of Najee. Is like, I laid this out in the story that I did on it, I guess Wednesday or Thursday, at some point this week. But like, he was pretty outspoken, never more so than after that Bills playoff loss, the end of his third season, where he's like, we need to do some things to elevate in-house things, be more disciplined, more committed. Like, he's kind of vague about that at the time. Now looking back, I wonder, was that about resources, facilities, that kind of stuff? I really don't know. He insisted that it wasn't about the coaching, so who's to say? But then Art Rooney II gets asked about that, later that month, and he talks about how it was still a good season and that kind of thing. I almost wonder if the Steelers were like, whoa, we got this guy from Alabama who's used to winning national championships, and he's talking about our seasons aren't good enough. It's like, hold on, Najee, you sound like the fans now, buddy. Relax. We went 10-7. We made the playoffs. All right, calm down. We'll be better next season. And it seemed like he was just obviously he wasn't happy enough with that. So I kind of commend him for that view.
Yeah, I think that's actually really interesting, and I think it'll be interesting to see how he does in Los Angeles. We covered him here for 4 years. We'll see how
everybody wants a winner. Every NFL team wants a winner, but what about when it's kind of a high maintenance winner?
High maintenance winner.
We need to put more work into this, and it's like, all right, we'll see. But and to Art Rooney's credit, he's like, his overall point was like, if a player feels that way, we'd rather it come to us.
Then to go
Mike Tomlin or then through the media. So hey, I guess could be a good book written about Najee and his Steelers tenure someday.
That'd be interesting to write. Maybe you can write it, Brian. You can get an inside.
I don't know about that one.
But in all seriousness, I think we wanted to talk about that because of its the outlook that it has on the Steelers, and just as another player exiting the team and giving some.
Well, he's just a lightning rod too. People are going to be debating Najee for years and years of whether he was a good pick, bad pick. Did he fail the Steelers? Did they fail him? It's kind of right up there with the Kenny Pickett's of hypotheticals and bar fodder.
Absolutely. We're gonna come back next week with Ray, and we will see if anything happens with Aaron Rodgers. But just know he has been in the Steelers facility on Friday. There's no imminent deal supposedly coming. We'd expect him to probably visit the Giants next soon, but we will keep you apprised of all those developments here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Read all of our work at post-gazette.com. Watch this show or listen to this show on your favorite podcasting apps or on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Have a good weekend. We'll see you Monday here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.